Right, good evening everybody and welcome to today's Customer and Corporate Services and Scrutiny Management Committee meeting. Just to remind everybody, as we're an in-person meeting, there's nobody in the room who doesn't know where the toilets are, but if the fire alarm does go off, it isn't expected, so we will need to leave the building via the nearest exits. And if I could remind you all, please to turn off your mobile phones or put them on silent. We have received two sets of apologies for this evening's meeting. I've received apologies from Councillor Orrell and I've received apologies from Councillor Baker, who is being substituted by Councillor Wan. I feel compelled to once again record the frustration I have with this arrangement, although in one sense this evening we could perhaps consider you to be Councillor Orrell's substitute instead, and thereby we're all happy. So if I move us on to agenda item 1, which is declarations of interest. Do I have any declarations in respect to this evening's agenda? Not seeing any from any committee members. I'm just going to record a slightly woolly declaration, which is, I think when we last discussed the Digital York Steering Group, I thought there was a possibility that my mum might be a member of that steering group. I've forgotten to check with her whether she is or not, so there is still a possibility that she might be a member of that group, but I certainly haven't discussed anything to do with it with her. Moving us on to agenda item 2, which is exclusion of press and public. Members will note we do have some pink papers in this evening's agenda pack, which are confidential. I believe that there will be one or two questions that we want to ask in relation to those pink papers. So I'm going to propose that we do exclude press and public, and I'm just going to get this right, and please Dawn or Janie just correct me if I've moved it incorrectly. We are considering agenda item 5 on the grounds that it contains information relating to ongoing negotiations with trade unions. This information is classed as exempt under paragraphs 4 of schedule 12A to section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended by the Local Government Access to Information Variation Order 2006. If everybody's happy with that, can I just see a show of hands that you're all happy that we proceed in that manner? That's great. And in light of that, what I propose to do is move agenda item 5 to the end of the meeting's agenda, such that we can get through all of the public business first before we have to go into private session. So again, if everybody's happy with that, that's the way I propose that we proceed. Thank you. So on to agenda item 3, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of January. Does anybody have any comment on the minutes, or are you happy that I sign them as an accurate record? Agreed. Thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 4 then, public participation. We don't have anybody registered to speak this evening, so we can move straight on to agenda item 6. Which is at page 23 of your papers. Now, for this evening's meeting, we were due to have Pauline Stutchfield presenting this item, but unfortunately she is currently isolating, having tested positive for COVID-19. So I have spoken to her this morning and extended our best wishes to her from the committee. We do have Roy Grant, who's the head of ICT, who is on Zoom and joining us. So Roy, can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can, Chair. Thank you.
That's fantastic. So I believe that members will have received a presentation within the agenda pack. I've assumed that everybody has read through the presentation, but I think, Roy, if you wanted to just very quickly talk us through anything on that. And I don't know if you received the same update that I received from Pauline, just highlighting a couple of areas that she wanted to cover. So either if you can cover that, or if needs be, I can just tell committee members about those aspects, and then we can just see if there's any questions.
Okay, no, I can cover that. So you've seen the slides in which are next to the report, and it gives an update on the new governance arrangements for the Digital Inclusion Partnership. And in particular on this update, it looks into one of the details element, it's partnership working, which is the ICT reuse scheme and its significant impact that it's had in its first year of operation. There's also a general update on connectivity within the slide deck, and there's one slide that I'd like to have a conversation around this providing when we look at how we can improve the connectivity, particularly around the social housing areas within the city. On the previous meeting, you asked us if my account is not delivering a mechanism by which the council can have a dialogue with on residents. How is this taking place? Within the slide deck, you'll notice there's some slides that our communications team have put together for us. So I'm going to give you an update on the use of social media, which in particular, but recognise the need to blend the offline and online methods. So we're pulling inclusive as much as we can be. And one of those examples is our big conversation focus groups to reach the unheard voices that potentially haven't got the online channels. Back in members asked, the final slide is really for yourselves to consider any other areas for future reporting and review by this committee, the regularity of digital inclusion updates, or any of the resident facing areas for consideration that are not covered by any other scrutiny committee. Is really the main points I wanted to get across with the slide deck that you've had presented. And I'd really like to focus in on the slide around the potential expansion of free Wi-Fi connectivity in around the social housing areas we have in York. I'm currently working with colleagues in our housing when we're looking at any new housing developments to include connectivity in the open play areas, such like the workspace in Lowfields and other developments that we've got in train at the moment, where we build in and extend the reach of the connections that we've got in the city centre, in the museum gardens and across in Joseph Roundtree's Park, that type of access to free Wi-Fi. Anytime we build anything as a council, if there's any open play areas, we actually include the connectivity piece. And then we need to look at how we address our existing and established social housing areas. Providing connectivity into these areas may come at a cost. So we can explore some of the potential opportunities with some of the telcos that are working in the York area, and we'll be expanding their footprints in the York area. How can it extend some of the reach of making the connectivity reachable, affordable within our social housing areas? So that is an area that I'd like to have a conversation with the committee following today's meeting about how we can progress some of this work. So we just try and expand the reach of affordable or if not free connectivity wherever possible within the city.
Okay, thank you very much. That's really helpful. Committee members, I don't know if you have any immediate questions that you wanted to ask. Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. It was just around the IT reuse scheme, some helpful stats on number of devices received and donated. I don't know if, Roy, if you've got a sense of the kind of age ranges that have been beneficiaries of the equipment. Is it what proportion are older people? What proportion are so younger people, families? Is there any information around where some of the equipment is going, which maybe gives us a better idea of where the areas of greatest need and demand are?
I haven't got that information to hand, but I can certainly look into if we've got the breakdown of the demographics of where it's gone in terms of age or also locality as well. So I can get that information to the committee.
That'd be great if you could either send it on to myself or Jane Mellor at Democracy Services, and we can then circulate it to committee members. That'd be brilliant. Any further questions from committee members? I've just got a couple. No. You touched on the free Wi-Fi expansion into social housing areas, and I think that's really encouraging if we're looking at sort of future-proofing or building that into any new developments. Mm-hmm. In terms of the existing developments and in terms of what might be helpful from a scrutiny perspective, I mean, I think it would certainly be useful to have a clearer sense of what sort of ballpark of costs we might be talking about, if it is a cost to be borne by the council rather than, say, some of the providers. I'm just wondering whether or not this is something that might be worth bringing back through housing scrutiny at a future date, just on that specific area. I'm getting a nod from Councillor Fenton as the chair of that committee. Roy, is that something that you'd be happy to do to bring back in a bit more detail, what it might look like as a sort of retrofit, as it were.
I think what we could look at the areas, if there's any priorities or any hotspots, we could certainly look at them and then come up with some costings or different options of models. And it's really built on the back of, we put some of the connectivity into our traveller slates a few years ago. So it's just really making sure that we start to join up the city, so we don't create a different experience by postcode. It's a bit, I guess it's a bit like the telcos are doing and the fibre rollouts. Some of this is within our control, and we can also look at the areas. I'll do that with the housing colleagues. If we can look at the areas where there's probably most need, or we've had most feedback, where it would bring most benefit, because we'll be able to do the whole city in one fell swoop. I guess we'll just need to target where we can do some of the drops. There is a trial going on across in Manchester, so I'm actually engaged with them to see how that's going. I can feed that back.
Well, again, I think that could be really helpful to see what's happening in other local authority areas. So what I'll do is I'll leave you to have a conversation with Councillor Fenton in sort of due course, and then we can perhaps look at bringing that through that committee. I think that would be a sensible route. The other question that I wanted to ask you, and I'm not sure whether this would fit within your remit or not, so please, do tell me if it's not right. But my inbox has certainly been bulging with people who've been dealing with the new digital Res Park scheme, and in particular, issues around navigating the website. So I think sort of putting aside any of the issues to do with the enforcement and what have you around Res Park itself, how are we helping residents to navigate a system that has changed quite significantly for some people? I had somebody on the phone today who was an elderly lady who her daughter had to come across from Leeds to come into the council to get some physical parking vouchers because she was getting so confused with how best to navigate the system. Is that something that does cover under your area, first of all? And secondly, when we're looking at how we're updating the council websites, how are we kind of testing them with members of the public to make sure that they're logical for a user to get through, rather than perhaps logical from a IT perspective in terms of the sort of behind the scenes mechanism? Okay.
The actual website and its accessibility doesn't sit with myself direct, but what I can do is I can certainly have a conversation with colleagues. We do undertake some testing about how it's accessible, and it's got to be, a user-friendly, a good experience. But clearly, the release that we've just put out there is proven difficult for some people. So what I will do is I'll go away and I'll talk to colleagues about the training and support and what testing the metrics we do put in place when we do roll out any new online services, that we can revisit that with the colleagues who look after the website and some of that content.
That'd be really helpful, and I think what would also be helpful would be if you could just outline what might be the best route for feeding back, so that any changes that need to be made can be made. Because certainly I know in my experience, and I saw one or two nods around the table, I'm getting the same sort of questions again and again and again, with people finding that it's not immediately obvious how they renew permits or how they access visitor permits. And so I think probably parking services have been doing quite a lot of ringing people up and talking them through things. So it'd be useful if we could know how we might best feedback and get the amendments to the websites so that they're as user-friendly as possible. Okay, will do. I'll include that in the update that I'll give back to Jane. It'll make sure it gets to yourselves. That's great. So unless any members had any further questions, Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions on the information about the Digital York Partnership Steering Group, and in other parts of the presentation, I'd maybe expected to see reference to York Explore in terms of the work that they do when guiding people through using IT. Often when people go into the library to book a slot on a computer, I know often staff are sort of working with the users. I just wondered to what extent York Explorer are kind of involved in the sort of digital inclusion work that the council's doing. And then the other question was around page 43. There's some of the graphics from social media material that the council shares, a lot of which it's really helpful and it's good. What's the strategy in terms of email communication with residents who don't access social media, but for whom we do have email addresses? For example, often on social media, there's information shared about road closures on particular dates at particular times. If you're affected by that, but you're not on social media, is there a channel through which the council could identify a geographical area? Say we have GDPR compliant email addresses that have been shared with us by residents living in this patch. Can we share information with them directly through email rather than a social media post that many people in that neighbourhood may never see? So I just wondered what the approach was on that. Thank you.
Okay, I can pick up the first question. The actual digital partnership group is actually led by York Explore. So they're actually integral, I guess, and up front and centre as part of that work, because they are a key part of the city and a key part of that supported learning mechanism. So we've been quite keen to widen the group, but also let it be led by Fiona and the team, who are at the forefront, well, they're at the front end of that customer engagement piece, aren't they? So as digital partnership is led by York Explore, so they are very much part of that. And we'll pick up your kind of question regarding the email contract with our comms team, and we'll make sure I get back to you. And on the previous question, I should have made a clear point that customer contact centre is probably the best start point for anyone to feedback about the recent new online parking service that we've put live. But as I say, so if you, in theory, anybody said who wants to give feedback or channel feedback to, put it into our contact centre, but I will be having a discussion with colleagues around the website and the customer services team about how we can test and look at making that a little bit more user friendly.
Okay, unless there's further questions, I'll just thank you very much for your time this evening, Roy. It's slightly odd talking to a room and hearing a voice responding, but I do appreciate you joining us in this way this evening. Thanks.
Well, apologies, I was late getting away from Harrogate, so anyway, I could join the meeting. Yeah,
no problems. Thank you. Just before I move us on to agenda item 7, I did have a conversation, as I say, with Pauline this morning, just thinking about how we handle this item going forward, and some of the comments that myself and the Vice Chair had fed back in terms of what we wanted from the reports today. She was suggesting that focusing on digital inclusion was useful, but actually a more significant part of her work at the moment that relates to this is the financial inclusion aspect. And so what I was going to propose to do was, when we next revisit this, I think we've said we want to keep an eye on this every 6 months or so, that whilst we note the digital inclusion, we perhaps put a bit more focus on the financial inclusion side of things next time around. So if members are happy with that, I've seen 1 or 2 nods, then that's the steer that I will give to Pauline. Okay, thank you very much. Moving us on to agenda item 7, which is the monitoring and tracking of approved council motions. I don't know if Dawn or Janie just wanted to give us a very brief overview. We've had a bit of conversation as well, and then I've got a quick proposal for committee members on it as well. So.
Yeah, all I just want to do is remind members basically that this is the second time you've received a report of this nature. This is the first of your agreed biannual updates, and it updates the status of motions in terms of the actions that have been implemented or that are in progress since the last time you actually received this report. And it's before you today to look at those and comment on the process that we've now put in place, or to comment on any of the actions that you see before you.
So I'll take any comments or questions in a moment. The first thing that I just wanted to propose that we do going forward is there's quite a number of motions on here where all of the actions are showing as completed. And my view is that we should continue to take a 6-monthly update, but where we have satisfied ourselves that everything on that motion has been completed, we don't then need to keep seeing that same motion coming through. It's the live motions with actions that are still to be completed that I think this committee should be monitoring. That's in line with what we do with things like scrutiny reviews, where there's a number of recommendations and we sort of strike them off as they're completed. And I think that would be sensible for us to do going forward. So again, if everybody's happy that we take that approach, yeah, then I think, as I say, going forward, I'd like to suggest we do that. I noted that there was a couple of council meetings in this current 4-year cycle that we've missed from the start of this list. So I don't think we've got, I think it was July and September 2019. And I just wanted to check whether or not we had previously tracked those motions and decided to remove them.
Yeah.
Is that the case? Right.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
That's why they're not there this time.
That's great. That's fine. And then the other one, which is the slightly complicated one that was flagged to me this morning, and I have had a bit of conversation with both Dawn and Janie about it, but I do want to just raise it here because it is a public document. Page 51, the Healthier Greener York Council motion. The 1, 2, 3, 4th bullet point down, I've raised some concerns about the actions that are being taken against that bullet point. You may recall back at this meeting that there was an amendment to the motion which was put forward, I think actually by yourself, Councillor Fenton, which was to amend that line to remove the date of 2023 and to take out develops and implements a plan. And it was talking about doing this through LTP4 and My City Centre consultation. And the argument was made that that would slow down the process, and the amendment was subsequently lost and the council passed a motion unamended. So I was concerned to then see that the actions being taken against that were in line with the lost amendment, not in line with the past motion. And I've been asking as to whether or not that's an oversight, an error, a misunderstanding. I think both Dawn and Janie have had a little look into it. And Janie, I don't know if you wanted to just talk to the points that you've found so far, and then we can see where we are from there.
Thank you, Chair. So for the penultimate entry on page 51 for the actions taken column, I have spoken with my colleague, the Director of Environment, Transport and Planning. I've been advised that the executive member for transport held an executive member decision session on the 11th of May 2021. And at that point, he took the decision that in response to taking action against this motion, the report says the LTP also needs to consider the December 2019 full council motion to reduce car use in central York and around the city schools and CYC's commitment to zero carbon. So the executive member for transport has determined that the way forward that he's going to address the council motion is by virtue of that, and it is contained within a decision session report from the 11th of May 2021. Because of time, I've not been able to find anything further, but I have provided the chair with the link to the relevant report from that meeting. Thank you.
Okay, so that's helpful. What I think I just would like to understand, and I think if we can sort of slightly remove from the specifics of this particular motion and just into the more general context, if council passes a motion that says we want this course of action to take place, it then seems odd that subsequently an executive member who I think in this case may have voted against voted in favour of the amendment and then did subsequently vote in favour of the unamended motion, but then can change the outcome of a full council motion or the way in which it's addressed. Do you see the query that this raises, I suppose? Because what it appears has happened is a motion has been put forward, an amendment to change it to take a particular course of action has fallen. Full council has decided on the original course of action, but then subsequently the course of action as put forward by the amendment is the action that's being taken. And that seems to be at odds with sort of common sense democratic process, as it were.
I'm presuming you're asking me.
I am. Yeah.
So council puts for motions. When motions are passed, they are a request to the decision makers of the council. It's either members or executive members. Executive members are the ultimately the decision makers. The motion is the challenge to the decision makers, i.e. the executive members, to go away and deliver the aspirations of that motion. In this particular case, if we just use page 51, it's around that. So the challenge has been put by full council to the relevant executive member or the executive as a collective to deliver and achieve. The executive member on this particular instance has chosen that the best way forward is to address it in the manner that I've just expressed in response to your previous question. But it is for the decision makers to determine how best to achieve the outcomes of the council motion. So, and likewise as well, if there's technical difficulties, if there, for example, it legally cannot be done, financially is unaffordable, for example, if to do something would make the council bankrupt or financially unstable, that's where officers, professional officers come in and advise the decision makers that such a course of action can't be undertaken, for example, because of certain technical boundaries. So it is a desire for the decision makers to look at this and try and achieve the outcome that best fits with the motion that the council has granted.
So without putting words into your mouth at all, in effect, I'm sorry, in effect, does council ask the exec member to do something? And if the exec member decides that actually they don't wish to do that, there's no obligation for them to do that?
No, not really. You are putting words in my mouth by saying that, no disrespect, but you are, Chair. The decision maker is legally liable for the decisions that they have to make, and they have to work within the advice that is received from officers. We do check motions, as you know, prior to full council to make sure that they are in the bare bones of what is set out legally and financially doable and technically deliverable. However, further exploration may mean that officers prevent the decision makers, i.e. executive members, from making the decisions or even meeting the challenges that have been set by full council in a motion. So it is effectively, if I put it in really basic terms, the full council says, please can you go away and look at delivering this because the outcome we believe is the best for the city. The executive member may say, absolutely, but officers wouldn't let me do this, but I've tried to do this, which is like 3/4 of the way. And then at which point scrutiny here looks at deliverability and you say, well, I either met it in its entirety, we met 50% of it, or actually officers prevented from delivering it completely. And so it is, motions are, once passed, are really difficult. Some take years and years and years to try and deliver against. Others, like let's write a letter to the MP, is really deliverable in short. And that's the difference is it's more than likely that an officer, for example, would do something like write a letter to the MP on behalf of full council. But there is a lot of boundaries in place. There's a lot of hurdles in place. So just because full council have set it doesn't mean to say you have to deliver it word for word. It means it has to be done. And there's lots of hoops to go through. So some of them do take longer to do, or you try and achieve the best outcome that you can possibly and still fit within the aspiration of what full council has asked for.
I think that's helpful. And just so for the final bit, without labouring any further, so and that is then distinct from a full council decision, which would be, I think, not changeable, as opposed to a motion, which is a sort of a request for a particular type of action.
Yeah, a motion is a request. Please can the decision makers of the council go away and look at how can you achieve this? This is what we want for the city. Please go away and try and deliver it. There's some areas, however, where full council, some areas are just restricted to full council, and that's where they make a decision. So that's in the allocation of responsibilities. Some functions are purely allocated. For example, licensing is a true council function. So therefore, any decision that a full council makes in respect of licensing is binding. It has to do that because the law says it's a full council decision. Whereas on motions tend to be more executive decisions. So in the allocation of procedure regulations, you look at where does the legal responsibility for delivering a function lie? And I'm just going to say this, but the draft constitution that's going to full council on the 24th of March has put a lot more detail in Appendix 1 around the allocation of responsibility. So it's easier to understand in plain English and summary form, the difference between a full council function and an executive function, or even one that's like an either or function, which you can have, which gets a bit complicated. So yes, this is a challenge back to the decision makers, whereas in licensing, for example, it's you have to do this, do not pass go. This is our full and final decision.
No, I think that's really helpful to set that out, because I think that there is a perception certainly sort of out there in amongst residents and possibly amongst councillors as well, that if a motion is passed, that's then the decision of, or the policy of the city, and that's perhaps not, going to get my words right here, perhaps not strictly the case, even if the aspiration might be there.
Yeah, some of the softer things, the equalities motions that we've had, absolutely, that is setting an example. So, for example, officers put their preferred pronouns on their email addresses. Absolutely doable, because aspiration, yes, of course we can do it, so we're going to do it. There is always going to be the wish to try and deliver as close as possible to the motion, but there's some of the more complicated factors do take into account a lot of legal, financial, technical hurdles and barriers that have to be considered, which when you look at the motion, it looks brilliant to deliver, but actually could take years to deliver. So that's the difference really. But wherever possible, it's part of Dawn and mine's responsibility and the Deputy Monitoring Officer responsibility is to make sure that we can keep this oversight and make sure we can deliver as close as possible where we legally and financially can.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions on any other aspects of this agenda item? Not seeing any. Oh, yeah, apologies. Sorry, Councillor Fenton.
I don't know if you want to go. We don't really want comments by exception on what's here. That's fine. Page 53. Against maximising opportunities to build consensus. There's kind of a blank box next to the first council resolves about making budget information available by mid-December, which I think did happen last year. I just wondered what the status of that particular action was.
You can go away and find out.
Yeah, I saw it was a gap and thought it'd be
not my area.
No,
but yeah,
no.
obviously somebody's just not updated it,
Yeah.
I suspect.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. No further questions on that, so I will move us on to through pages to work out what agenda item 8, which is to look at the work plan. I think the work plan is fairly self-explanatory. What I will just update members on briefly is we are looking at putting together the scrutiny work plan for the coming municipal year. And the significant change that we're working through at the moment is that we're looking at this committee meeting every other month, with the in-between month meetings that we would have had being held as commission slots. The idea being that we can spread the the load of scrutiny more evenly around the different scrutiny committees, but also have a bit more flexibility, because obviously the next municipal year we will start to hit PERDA, and what we want to try to make sure is that we don't end up in a situation where some committees have a curtailed work plan because of PERDA. So we're going to just try to jiggle things around so that we have enough space to get through the scrutiny work that each of the different committee areas are wanting to get through. There's also one or two things which will be coming up in the next municipal year, not least of which is some of the elements around devolution, where we're anticipating that this committee will be asked to look into things or pass comment on aspects, but we're not quite sure what the time frame will be yet, because some of it might be dictated either by government or external stakeholders. And so we're trying to build in a little bit of flexibility so that we can have an input from Scrutiny in a timely way on some of those sort of standalone items. So again, it's just there for noting unless anybody has any further comments. Nope. In which case, I will take us all the way back to agenda item 5 and invite Helen Whiten to join the table. And this is the first time that you've actually come and spoken to us in the committee since taking over as head of HR. So welcome to the committee, and it's good to have you here. Because there is an element of this report which is confidential, what I'll do is I'll just ask you, Helen, just to kind of give us a brief overview to the report. There may be some questions on the white paper elements, which I'll take first in public, and then if members, once we've sort of exhausted any questions there might be on that, we'll then move into private session, and then we can continue asking any further questions on the pink papers. So over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, hello everybody, nice to meet you all. Yes, so this is the review of the Organisational Development Plan, which I understand that you'd had a copy previously, and I'd appended it to the background papers. And really, when I've come in as my role, because when it was written originally, we were in recovery, and we weren't in recovery. It's gone on a lot longer than we anticipated. So what I've done is revise it, because some of the items that were on it previously weren't necessarily going to be viable. We were in a very different place. We've worked hybridly, and there's a lot of other things. And there's been a lot of opportunities come up as well. So I've rewritten the Organisational Development Plan, and I've only done it for 12 months as opposed to the original 24 months. And this is really quite targeted and focused. We're also trying to include a lot more of our workforce, because we're now in a different place than we were as well. And really, there is an element of celebration as well, because the workforce have done a tremendous amount over the last 24 months. And I think that needs to be applauded at the same time, of which you've got some details added there. As the Chair said, the reasons why this hasn't gone to be a public document is because it hasn't been shared. It's literally hot off the press. And I've been able to have the privilege of working with a lot of the officers and a lot of members as well, to be able to gather views and thoughts to be able to formulate this plan. But now my job is to basically give this to managers, getting them engaged and getting them back on track, because they've worked incredibly hard, and we need that continuity to go forward. So obviously my recommendations within those are to note the former OD plan, elements that we've agreed, the elements that we've actually achieved, and then looking at the new OD plan and going forward for the next 12 months. It may seem a little bit ambitious. However, I genuinely think it is achievable. You can ask me that in 6 months' time. However, I genuinely think that we can achieve it, because there's a lot of parallels with it. There's also the themes. We aren't changing the themes. They're still relevant. They're still very valid for this time of year. And certainly the values as well, because although there has been some suggestion that we needed to renew the values, I disagree. I've come in from another authority. They're still very relevant. We just need to simply embed them and get people back on track. And this is all about being able to get our managers in a place where we can deliver for the future. Because after all, the 10-year plan for the authority is ambitious, and we need the right skills and the right people in place. And hopefully the tasks that we've got on board within the plan will help us do that. CMT are on board. We've got specific sponsors, which you'll have seen in my report there. And we're making that actually CMT members right from the top are embedding all of these actions down. And both myself and the CRO are going to meet regularly with the with CMT sponsors to make sure that that's then cascaded down into the rest of the workforce, and managers at every level cascading to all areas of the workforce as well, which is really important. There's no point in having an OD plan and our values, etc., that isn't then owned, but they need to know how to own it. That's the big thing, to be able to have the tools in place, and that's what I can brief managers on a regular basis. That probably gives a quick synopsis, if that's okay, Chair, and then we can take questions.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Thank you. So I'll just invite any questions, like I say, on the white papers, so pages 5 to 10 or 9 really. First of all, so if anybody has any questions on any of those aspects. Councillor Fenton.
Thanks, Sharon. Thank you, Helen. Just the paragraph 17 to 19 talks about equipping workforce with relevant tools, engaging and employees needing to be honest about services and the work they deliver. How going forward, how do you plan to measure that in terms of getting feedback from employees about how their experience matches up with the aspiration that's set out here?
There's a number of ways we can actually do that, councillor, because we will do pulse surveys. That's quite common across the council, but we don't obviously survey people to death. When people leave, when people start, so we're revising some of the induction processes. So how was your experience? I always say that anyone coming into the council is a free consultant. Tell us where you've been, how are we doing, etc. We can do that. Managers should be doing that. One-to-ones, PDR process, and obviously there's KPIs behind all of those processes as well. Simply by listening, we're doing inductions, we're doing training all the time. Really, managers should be learning to be the eyes and ears and reporting back at every single level. So actually, we get our information from a wealth of things. We can tell whether absences, information comes through in occupational health reports, information comes from many, many different directions. That's how we monitor how things are happening. And if things are not happening quite right, that's where we can be quite proactive. Trade unions, we work very, very closely with the trade unions as well. So it's about having those open conversations. In terms of how I'm going to engage managers, I've already drafted the document, and it's about being able to say, this is our OD plan, these are the themes, these are how to start conversations in your team. And it's around the managers saying, okay, we have a skills, for instance, have we got the right skills in place? When people leave, what are we doing about succession planning? What are we doing about talent management? We know somebody's leaving in 2 years' time. How are we going to build that through? We really need an apprentice. How are we going to look at doing that? So it's about having all those engagement conversations and making sure that managers and employees are key and part of that. And I've got a document that can help us start doing that.
Thank you. Just before I bring in Councillor Norman, can I just, and apologies because I didn't say this to you before, but when you're using abbreviations, just the very first time, could you just explain what they are? Just for any members of the public watching. So I think there was PDR, which is Performance Development Review, KPI, which is Key Performance Indicator, and the other one you mentioned was pulse surveys, which I must confess I'm not sure I know what they are.
A pulse survey is just literally a very quick very quick survey that goes out. It's just a term referred to where you might just ask 1 or 2 questions. So it's out there as a pulse temperature.
That's great. Thank you very much. Councillor Norman.
Thank you very much. Hello. Just on, I think they're on page 6, the key themes section. I'm just interested by the grouping of staff retention and recognition, purely because it strikes me that staff retention is something impacted quite significantly by a lot of the other key themes stated. Health and well-being, skills, new ways of working, etc. So what's the kind of ethos behind linking retention and recognition into that section together?
To be honest, these were themes that were already in existence, so I've adopted them effectively and not changed them. But encouraging staff retention obviously is about we invest in our staff, and it's about retaining key skills. We don't want staff just to simply go, and it links to succession planning, it links to talent management. As I say, we don't want to invest in people and then they say, thank you very much, that's been great experience, York. I will now move on to another council, another employer, etc. Recognition is also for the hard work that they actually do for us. So it does go hand in hand. It's very linked to motivation, to be honest. So it's that retention and making sure that we're actually motivating our staff. So
I guess just trying to stress that it strikes me that merely recognising that, obviously, although important as it is to recognise the hard work of our staff, it is equally as important to ensure that their working conditions are as good as they could be, and that is as essential to what, but I would argue perhaps more essential to their retention than recognising their talent and contribution.
Yeah, the recognition is the whole recognition of the whole employment package, really. As you know, a lot of our terms and conditions are national terms and conditions. However, there is things that we can adopt locally. So, but we've always got to look at the budget envelope. But it's about being a competitive employer, keeping that employer brand there as well, which is what I've also mentioned, an element that Scrutiny can be involved with going forward. So, yeah.
Thanks. Just sort of building on that, because I'd made a note of that as well. And I guess the sort of question that follows from it is just understanding how, because I think having a sponsor for each area is useful. It gives you a name to go back and sort of check to. But how will each of the sponsors be working with each other to ensure that actually, if Jamila notes that we've got an issue around staff retention, which is actually that people don't feel their health and well-being is looked after properly, how do they go and address that with Sharon? Or likewise, the skills and knowledge isn't there, so there's not the career progression. So, what's the mechanism by which Jamila can go and challenge Neil over that aspect of it?
Absolutely, that's a really good point, which is why I wanted to put the sponsors in place. It's about having that recognition at CMT, and we've got 3 monthly checklists in. So if I hear things that are going off in people's services, and then there's similar issues, but maybe it's a little bit tangent, we can look at in place as well. And actually we can say, this is where my pulse survey comes back in. Have we got an issue here? And we need to draw it all in. So what we're proposing with CMT members, as I mentioned earlier, is that we'll have the individual sponsors, they can do that, but they're both feeding into myself and the COO, the Chief Operating Officer. So we can identify, and really, I'd like to think that I'm the linchpin to be able to make that go forward. And with my HR managers, I can then feed this information into DMTs as well. So there's an issue over there. Do we also need to address it there? And it isn't about one size fits all. It's about making sure that we get advice and guidance out to the rest of the organisation as well. So identifying it. So I think there's lots of links, but it can't just be blanket. But we're certainly drawing on all the information. And that's the key to what I don't think has happened to date, because we haven't been allowed to do it with a COVID situation with this plan. So now we're in that recovery. Let's hope that that can work.
Thank you. If any other members have questions, do stick your hands up. I've just got a couple before I then look at moving us into the private session. Sort of building on that around, COVID and the impact of COVID. And I think, we're looking at perhaps a different model of working and one where people will be likely working from home more than they were previously for, probably permanently, I would imagine. And I was just interested in paragraph 20, sort of talks about manager briefings and sharing how the roles fit together and all of that, which all looks really positive and constructive. But then just the last sentence says this will be introduced with podcasts and videos and I guess I was just a little bit worried that if people are a little bit more atomized already and then they have a sort of possibly slightly impersonal, it's one thing to be in a Zoom meeting, but if actually what you're getting is a podcast or a video message where it's pre-recorded, and I may be misreading that, but I just wanted to check what we're doing to kind of caution against anything that might further atomize the organisation. Because I think at the moment, if people are not interacting with each other regularly in West offices or at Hazel Court, there is that risk that people feel more and more and more disconnected from the organisation. And I don't want to be putting anything into place that would further do that.
Actually, contrary to what you said, this is all about getting consistency, because I may deliver something in March and somebody doesn't start till May and they may not have heard about it. So actually those podcasts are there. So actually managers can have face-to-face conversations, but say, let's go through this presentation, and having that podcast style or that voiced over presentation makes sure, because I propose to do quite a few of them, to say, this is the OD plan, this is our values, and this is what it is, without a manager going, oh, there's a presentation there you go, just go and watch it. Because that actually loses a lot of the momentum, no matter where you are, whether you've been on maternity leave, you're a new starter or whatever, or you only have 20 minutes. What I don't want is the voice to be diluted. I want that consistent approach, which is why I want to introduce some of the other methods. That doesn't mean to say that will be the only method. It's about a combination, because of all of our officers work very diversely, very, very different ways. It's not just the focus for those that work from home. It's being able to say, right, okay, refuse driver, I know you've only got 13 minutes to be able to deliver certain aspects. What we can do is do some snap bites of being able to see, and that will be kind of a short video or something that they can listen to, and then it'd be followed up with maybe a flyer, a one-sided flyer. Somebody who's in the office might then do a kind of learning, I've completely forgotten the word of it, the online learning with assessments, that's not practical for a refuse driver. So it's about having that combination. We're not a one-size-fits-all diverse organisation, and we shouldn't use our communication methods, which is why I'm trying to introduce lots of things. But that certainly isn't just keeping our virtual world. We need team meetings that can have all the information and then discussion points around it. So it's almost like action learning.
Yeah, that's reassuring. I think if it's a sort of if I'm getting you right, you're proposing to use those sorts of things as a tool for then further discussion and further kind of development, not something that would be a substitute for a one-to-one or a team meeting or anything like that. Absolutely,
it's a tool for managers more than anything else as well, and for employees. And it's about, I'd say, that consistent approach.
That's helpful, thank you. And then my final question, which possibly may take us into the private session. So let's just see. I'll put it to you in public, and then we'll see how much you can answer or not. Page 6, paragraphs 8 and 9, talks about things that were in the previous OD that have been removed, either because they've not been progressed or have been deemed no longer relevant or no longer viable. And what I was looking for within the pink papers was anything to indicate what those things that were there that now aren't there are, and I couldn't find that. So I just wondered if you can give us a sense of the sorts of things that might have been deemed no longer relevant or no longer viable that we're now not proposing to do. And then, if needs be, we can go on to then talk about the things we are proposing to do.
Absolutely. One of the ones I've mentioned a little bit was the values. Was to re-engage, and do we need to resubmit all the values? And I said, no, we don't. They're still very relevant. So that was one of the items on there. A couple more were very much related to publicly displaying a lot of information for officers. Well, actually, we're in and out an awful lot more. And certainly during the COVID period, there wasn't officers in a building. So why publicly put lots and lots of posters up? So again, it was a way, probably more the method of how they were actually going to deliver, as opposed to actually all of the items. But when we go into the other section, I can also talk around some of the ones that have been omitted. But it was more around the, some had been completed. So work with trade unions was one of them. We've engaged with trade unions. We have a very healthy way of engaging with them on a fortnightly basis. Actually, every week I speak to the unions since I've been here. So there was actions like that have just been completed and sorted. Quite a lot of them were related to COVID as well. That's already there. Working as one was a really good one. That was there. And actually we've moved on and achieved. So therefore there's new items as well.
Okay, great. Any further questions on the white paper? Nope. Okay, so what I need to do now is end the public section of this evening's meeting. So thank you everybody for watching and listening. And then we will move into a private session to be able to continue with the remainder of the meeting. And we won't be coming back onto the public webcast at the end of that section. So this is the end of the public broadcast.